Well, welcome to the Collector Car Podcast. Well, today we're talking about something very important, collector car estate planning with one of my favorite authors, John Dranius. Now, we'll get to his stuff in a little bit. I love his Legal Files article that happens every month in Sports Car Market magazine. So if you haven't checked that out, please do so. His most recent article was pretty fascinating. Gotta sue somebody. A deadly accident at a dealership leads to the car's owner being slapped with a $15 million lawsuit. That's just nuts. It sounds crazy. And when you read his article, you understand why the owner was sued. Very interesting. Now, before we get to all of this, I do have a few updates. Again, there is a new podcast episode every Thursday. New YouTube occurs every Monday, and then little shorts occur every day. I'm shooting for the rest of the year. They're to be a fun little short to occur every day. Now that includes Keep Cash and Collect, market valuations. If you like market trends, you can check out this 1976 Ferrari 328 GTS where I do some fun little market trends. It's about 60 seconds. Virtual car show. I was at the Hillsborough Concours Elegance and Keeneland Concours, so you'll experience it for yourself from my eyes and my camera. I'll have collector interviews, museum tours, all sorts of fun stuff. Now, some future podcast episodes include artist Kelly Tuffler. He gives back. He's going to donate a painting at R.M. Sotheby's Monterey sale. Let's see, what else is coming up? We have an R.M. Sotheby's Mega Monterey review. If you haven't heard, we have about $300 million worth of cars. That's around the low estimate. Some iconic cars coming to Monterey. So I will be reviewing those with some fun folks. I will have my 2022 bull market update. So this is when I picked cars I thought would appreciate in 2022. You can actually see how well I picked these cars. I'll give you an update. I think it was around 19 or 20 cars. I have some more deep dives into Jay Leno. His collection, his American classics, that will be coming up as well as some of his weird and wonderful cars. Also, downshifting market trends. I don't know if we've reached a peak yet or not, but I have seen quite a few cars that either plateaued or are down in the latest 12 months. So I will recap some of those for you so you can kind of see what the market is doing and more. So there's a lot of fun stuff coming up in the next couple months. All right, now on to collector car estate planning. I'm giving my 2 cents before we hear from John. So you'll have to put up with my opinion first, and then we'll hear from the expert. So, based on my experience as a collector car consultant for R.M. Sotheby's, I have identified 5 scenarios collectors have for liquidating their estates for when they pass away. Now, nobody wants to think about the future and passing away, but you really need to if you want to be sure that you don't burden your family with these incredible cars. All right, first off, they do nothing. They do absolutely nothing. They think they're bulletproof. They don't have it in a will. And then when things turn for the worse, their family has to deal with it, and it can be a massive headache. The values of the cars are not realized. You get a lot of tire kickers. All sorts of bad stuff can happen if you do nothing. Now, the other scenario I see quite often, the collector will ask a friend or a buddy to sell the cars when they pass away. So it's an informal, hey, if something happens to me, I need you to sell my cars for me. Now, no one really wants that responsibility. I have one friend who had 3 of his friends ask him to do that if they pass away. And he's the first one that told me, you know what, I don't want to have to do this, because he feels a responsibility to the family to get the most money possible for the value of the cars. So he does not want that responsibility. All right, the third and slightly better avenue is to have someone within the automotive world, the automotive industry, as a contact. So that could be someone such as myself, who's a car specialist, someone you trust, could be an appraiser, could be someone you know that's in the business. That's basically where maybe you have a business card on file, and you tell your significant other, hey, if anything ever happens to me, call this person. Now, the downside there is obviously, your spouse maybe doesn't know all the parameters. It's, again, a big burden for them to have to deal with, and hope and pray that that person is trustworthy. All right, one of the better things I've seen people do is they have a plan set up with a will, have it drafted up with their lawyer. They might have the cars in a trust. That is someone who is taking control of their future. And then obviously I work with an auction company, but one of the ones I like the most, and I'll tell you why here in a second, is they're some collectors will actively set up a plan to liquidate the estate with an auction house. And what I like about that is that you can set all of the fees up front. So, the seller's fee, the marketing fee, the shipping fee, and you know what? If you have a really big collection, you'll be surprised how low those fees are. Everybody gets hung up on fees, but I would say that's the last thing you need to worry about. And there's no cost to have a conversation. So, I want to get hung up on auction fees as a seller, especially if you're dealing with a collection, because the nicer the collection, honestly, the lower the fees get. So it's worth a phone call. Okay, those are my brief thoughts on collector car estate planning. Like I said, I am not an estate lawyer, but let's talk to someone who is. All right, welcome to the Collector Car Podcast. Hey, it's GStanley, and I'm excited to have someone on the call today to talk about a very important subject, estate planning. But first, I'd like to invite and thank John Dranius for joining us today. John, how you doing?
I'm doing just great. How about you?
Good. I'm doing well. I'm thrilled to have you on because I have been a fan of your legal files on Sports Car Market for years. I've been reading that's one of the first articles I go to on Sports Car Market. I always find the stuff you write really fascinating. So tell us a little bit, how long you've been involved with them?
I have been writing that column since I think it was 2003, something like that.
Oh, wow.
And I was just minding my own business, and Keith Martin suggested I should try writing a column, and I said, I don't know anything about this stuff. He said, oh, you're smart, you can just make it up, it'll be all right. So
well, what's great about the column is there's real world situations, and it's like you never know what direction it's going to go into, and it gets very complex, and some of the legal issues you have with collector cars. So I always find it fascinating to get your perspective, and then also what happened in the case afterwards. So it's kind of like a mini case of Law and Order, but in the printed page.
Yeah, it's been real fun to do. I've learned a lot.
Right.
I already told you I started out not knowing anything, so I've learned a lot. But I've also met a lot of people, made friends. I got made some great friends that I've met through the column, and it's all good stuff. So it's pretty interesting.
That's awesome. That's really great. Well, today we're talking about a very important subject matter, collector car estate planning. And the reason I bring this up, and I covered a little bit about it earlier in my intro before you jumped on here, is that as a car consultant, I run into this all the time, where these automobiles that are loved for years now become a big burden, especially if there's no plan put in place. So I appreciate you kind of giving us an overview. But before we do, tell us, what do you do day in and day out? I know I mentioned you write for Sports Car Market, you do the legal files article, but what's your day job?
I'm a lawyer. I practice law.
Okay, so you're in knee deep in this stuff every day.
Yeah, mostly what I do the most of is estate planning.
Okay.
And I've got I do small estates, large estates, collector car estates, non-collector car estates. That's my day job. Just do a lot of business law work, tax law and stuff. And I do quite a bit of work with car collectors. But I try to keep that a small part of my practice so it stays fun. If it became the only thing I did, it would be my day job.
Right.
And,
right.
So it's kind of it's a good balance. It's always kind of fun to get a new case, and it's always fun to help somebody, and it's not exactly work like the normal stuff I do.
Right. Well, I guess a great way to start this, and I know we have a lot of stuff to reference here, but say a client walks into your office and they say, hey, I have a 20 car collection. What do I do with it? When I pass away, what's the best way to liquidate these cars or to disperse them, appropriately and move on, so they're not a burden for the family that's left behind? I guess that's the best way to look at it. How would you walk them through that process?
Yeah, they say, well, I'm just going to leave them to my kids because I know they really want them or something, And but I've had this conversation a lot of times with people, and I tell them it's kind of a typical standard conversation. It's just, they're not like stocks. You can't just call your stockbroker and tell them that you want to sell everything because the market's going down the crapper. they're difficult,
Right.
So first thing is, does your family understand cars? Because it's, they got their peculiar needs. And then the second question is, does your family want them?
Right.
And they find a lot of times when they start thinking about it, they find out that they don't want them. And then the last question is, can your family afford them?
Right.
So a couple quick little stories. I have a longtime friend and client who had this E-Type Jaguar that he kept forever, never left the garage.
Okay.
I was trying to I was trying to convince me how to sell the car because I had a friend that wanted one, and so we talked about it, and he said, "Well, I promised it to my kids. My kids really want this car." So he says, "Well, I'm gonna talk to him about it." So he calls up his son and says, "I know you always wanted that car, and but I got an opportunity to sell it, but I think I'll just give it to you." And he says, "Well, geez, Dad, that's great, but we don't really have a parking space for it, and
Right.
we just had a new baby, and blah blah blah." I said, "Just go ahead and sell it." So
Right.
so
Right.
we sold the car. And then you've got, can your kids afford it? You
Yeah.
know, you do the math, whatever your estate is, 5 million, 10 million, 15 million, divide that by the number of kids. And that's what each of your kids is going to inherit. Now, if you give your car collection to one of the kids, that's maybe a half or 2/3 or 3/4 of their inheritance. Does that really make any good financial sense? So they're tough. I mean,
Right.
they're dealing with cars is really tough. You gotta maintain them all the time. They go bad sitting.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep. You do.
uh, the last thing you ever want to buy is a car that hasn't been driven in a long time, because you got to fix everything. They're a negative cash flow asset.
Right.
You spend money fixing them. They don't generate any income. They might go up in value, but they don't produce any cash. So it's a negative cash flow thing. You got to store them, you got to insure them, you got to do all that stuff. Uh, if you have to value the use, because
Right.
that's your profit, that you get to use the car. And if you're not a driver, then there's no benefit there. And they're not necessarily liquid.
Right.
Lately it's been pretty easy to sell a car, but it's turned a little bit.
Yep.
And everybody's got a car collection, and they know you guys, but um, not all of somebody's cars are really capable of fitting into an RM auction. You might get 3 or 4 out of the 10, and the rest you have to sell on Craigslist or something. I don't know, bring a trailer or whatever you got to do. But it's not that easy to liquidate the cars sometimes.
Right. Yep. Yeah, you're right. And we have had some situations such as that. It's a lot easier in the situation where, what, this is an outstanding collection. I want to make some plans in advance. We do have some options where, we can have the meeting saying, hey, when that time comes, unfortunate time comes, the owner knows where they're going to sell. They know what the fees are going to be. They know what the shipping is going to be, so it takes it off of the plate of the family to worry about it, and it's such a big sense of relief. I have many situations where I have a lot of car friends, and they say, hey, yeah, I got 3 guys that want me to sell their car when they pass away. And he's like, I don't want that. I don't want that responsibility of selling my buddy's car and hope to get a good amount of money for his family. Yeah, it can really be a difficult conversation, and turn those those cars that were so enjoyed for so many years into just like this lead anchor on the family, which is, nobody wants that for the family. Some people will say, what do I care? I'm not going to be here. But if you really, care about your family, you want to put some stuff in place prior, right?
Right, exactly. If you want to, if you got to be realistic and what's going to happen with the collection when you're gone. And if it's going to get sold, then you have to help your family be able to to get the value out of the cars,
Right.
So, and you can't just leave it to your wife or your oldest kid to figure out how to do it. You got to get uh, somebody or some group on board that would be advisors to the family, that would be able to step in after your death and help them get the money out of the cars and not have to sell them. Well, sometimes you have that conversation with a car collector and they get all kind of frustrated about it. And they say, well, why don't I just sell them all now?
Yes. Right.
And I'll just make it easy for everybody. And a lot of collectors are liquidating their collections right now.
Yeah.
It's a strong market. It's been. They know how to sell them. You can get out of it. They're not driving them as much as they used to. All kinds of things, But if you sell them now, then you've got a tax problem.
Right.
All gone up in value so much that the gain is a capital gain, and you've got to pay tax on it. So you've got to the profit at the federal level is taxed at 20% maximum, but then there's that 3.8% net investment income tax, so it's 23.8 federal. And then depending on what state you live in, you may or may not have a state income tax. If you're fortunate enough to live in California, you get to pay the highest income tax in the country. It's around 13% on top of the 23.8.
Right.
But if you're a little smarter and you live in Texas or Florida, there's no income tax, so you're only paying the 23.8. But if you keep the cars until you die and you pass them on to your family and they sell them, well, the cars are part of your estate and they get valued for estate tax purposes at whatever they're worth on the day of your death. And that becomes the income tax basis for the car, or your family's cost, if you will. So when they sell them at their value the next day, there's no income tax.
Right. Right.
So that's the big trade-off that we have in estate planning today. If you move appreciated assets at your death, there's a basis step up and the income tax goes away. If you sell them before you die, you pay the income tax, and then what's left gets taxed in your estate as well. So there's a big difference in tax when you sell during your lifetime as opposed to after your death.
Yeah, and walk me through that, because I know like you would have to worry about possibly the cars going into probate unless you're actively putting them in a trust. Like, tell us, what's the best way to prepare to transition your cars to your family upon your death? Is it setting up the cars in a trust? And what are like some of the, I don't know if you can ballpark the fees to take a car through probate. Like, I don't know what it would even cost to take like $100,000 car through probate. Do you have any insight on that, or just what's the best way to do it?
Well, probate's a real emotional thing with people. It's gotten a super bad reputation, and a lot of that reputation is well earned.
Right.
So it depends on the state, but some states have a pretty simple probate process. Probably one of the easiest ones, for example, is Washington. One of the worst is California. So no surprise that the living trust panacea developed in California. So let's talk a little bit about what probate is. If you get run over by a truck tomorrow,
right,
you own stuff, and you leave it to whoever your will says that you left it to. So that's all well and good, but when you look at it from the standpoint of the rest of us, we say, okay, well, it's too bad that Greg's died, and we know that Greg wanted this stuff to go to these people, but how do we get it from Greg to the beneficiaries? How do we get the title transferred?
Right.
And the answer to that is the court transfers the title in the probate process. So you go to court and open a probate so that ownership of your stuff can get transferred to your estate beneficiaries. And then the other element is that we can't let all of your stuff go to your beneficiaries without getting all your creditors paid first.
Right.
So you might owe a lot of money to people, and they deserve to get paid. So probate is the process, the legal process where the court supervises the administration of the estate and makes sure that all of the debts get paid first, and the court determines who the beneficiaries of your estate are. Not everyone's will is clearly written so that we can understand what they meant. Sometimes you have to interpret it and that kind of thing. And then at the end of that process, all the bills are paid, taxes are paid, everything. Then the court orders the distribution of the assets to the beneficiaries. So the expense is typically 2% or so.
Okay.
Paid to the executor or personal representative, and typically the same amount paid to the lawyer that does legal work.
Okay.
That's pretty much the California system. It's a little cheaper in Oregon. Lawyers don't get paid as much. The personal representative gets paid about the same. So think 2 to 5% maybe, but it could be more depending upon the complexity of the whole situation and what happens if you have lawsuits, will contests, outside claims and stuff. Then all of those numbers can go way up.
So, what would be the best way to avoid probate? I guess is the next best question.
Well, the best way to avoid probate is with a living trust.
Okay. Yep.
So you create a trust. You're the trustee. You transfer all your property to your trust. You transfer it to yourself. So your cars, your house, your stuff would not be owned by GStanley anymore. It would all be owned by GStanley, trustee of the GStanley Trust.
Right. Yeah.
And then when something happens to you at your death, a new trustee steps in to pick up where you left off. And there's no court process required there. The new trustee just takes over and then distributes the property out under the terms of the trust as you specified in the trust. So the trust works like a will, but it's sort of self-executing. You have a successor trustee that takes over and just does what the trust says. You don't need a court.
So can I be on the trust along with my wife? So if I were to pass away, she's automatically, or kids, if there's some kids involved, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. You could have one trust for the two of you. You could have separate trusts, one for each of you. You could be co-trustees. If anything happens to one of you, then the other one is the sole trustee. So it's really pretty simple in the sense. But you have to actually have the assets owned by the trust for this to work. If you leave something in your own name and it's not in the trust, then you have to go through a probate to get it from your individual name over to the trust.
Now, what's the cost ballpark to say set cars up into a trust, like get it all set up?
If you, I don't know, it depends. Depending on the situation, and because you got to do all your estate planning in the trust and all that, but typically I'd say 5,000 ish, 3 to 10, something like that.
Right. So a lot less than paying 2 to 5% on your cars if you have multiple cars, right?
That's yes. Yeah.
Right.
So it's better. Plus, it's private. Probate is a public record. You have to file an inventory. You have to report what's going on. You have to file an annual report with the court, and everything that goes to the court is a public record.
Right.
So sometimes you read in the paper about how somebody died and he left an estate at this amount or that amount or something. And that's how they find out. They just go down to the courthouse and get copies of what was filed, and then everything is in your estate. That you know, a lot of people don't like that, and for good reason.
Right. Right.
And there's, you know, a lot of sharks that read those records too. You know, and then somebody dies and the door starts getting knocked on. Somebody wants to help with this or help with that, or they got great, you know, great opportunity for an investment and all that stuff. So, so the family can become a victim in those circumstances now.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's good to know. I mean, you know, the living trust is a great way to save a lot of money and keep it under your own control and keep it private, right?
Right. But it doesn't save you any tax money.
Right.
That's,
Right.
I mean, you still own everything.
Yep.
And cars actually get taxed, you know, they get taxed kind of heavy. So if you think about it, well, you probably wouldn't have thought about it yourself. I do this all the time, so I think about this stuff. But the tax rules are not real favorable. You get some valuation problems, you know. So there's the estate tax regulations are pretty clear that personal property, which that's what a car is, jewelry is the same thing. It gets it's even worse with jewelry, but all of this stuff, any personal property, is valued for estate tax purposes at its fair market value. And the regulations say fair market value is basically retail.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, now you're in the car selling business, so you know there's a big difference between retail and wholesale. But you know, yeah, you know, I mean, you guys get a lot of money for the cars at the auctions. You know, you just amazed the whole world the other day with that Mercedes at 140 million.
Yep. Yep. For sure.
You know, that was, you know, I mean, there was some special aspects to that transaction, I'm sure. But you know, if you take a car to an auction and the buyer's bid, including the buyer premium,
Sure. Yep.
$1 million, the seller doesn't get anywhere near that $1 million. You know, you got to pay a seller's fee. You gotta buy the slot in the auction. You got to send the car there. You got to be there to answer questions, because you do better if the owner's there talking about the car than if it's just sitting there all by itself. You've got personal stuff. You got to fix stuff up. You got to detail it. You got to fix everything that could be wrong with it or something. You know, when you look at there's a big spread between what it sells for and what you actually put in the bank at the end. But you get taxed on the big dollars on what's, you know, what it sells for or would sell for without consideration. You can't deduct sales commissions and that kind of thing.
Sure. Right. Right.
So it gets hit pretty hard. And even if it's in a living trust, it's still owned by you. So the asset that's reported on the tax return is the Ferrari. It's not.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so that's why. So that's one of the reasons that I often push my clients into putting their cars into LLCs.
Okay. Yep.
Liability companies. There's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of things that you can do with that. But its fundamental point is if you own the whole LLC, then none of this works. But if you break up the ownership, perhaps with your wife or with your kids, so that you have separate ownership interests in the LLC, then the asset that gets reported on the estate tax return is the LLC interest.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So you own an LLC, and the LLC owns a bunch of cars. But we're not really valuing the cars, we're valuing the LLC. And the way that an LLC is valued is by looking at its income, which there won't be any, or you look at the net realizable value from a liquidation. You look at the net asset value, that sort of thing. And there's no real good law on this, but there's some recent cases that have really involve corporations that are kind of helpful here. If you look at it and say, well, the regulations say that you don't get to value a car based on the net value after the sales cost, but we're not valuing the car, we're valuing the LLC. And to get to that value, we look at, okay, well, how much could you sell the cars for? What will your expenses be? What would be left over? And that's what you would get in the liquidation. So that, I think, gives you a pretty good opportunity to use the net value rather than the gross value in valuing the collection.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So just so I get this right. So say if it's not there, you have to have like you would call it the retail value. Whereas as an LLC, it's more of, here's, what's it worth with my cost against the car. So there could be a significant gap between those two numbers, right?
Right. So the question would, if I died with a interest in an LLC, the question is, how much would you pay for that interest in the LLC? It's not how much would you pay for the cars, because that's not what we're valuing. We're valuing the LLC. So it's okay, how much would you pay for that? And the way you would figure out how much you'd be willing to pay for it, we say, well, okay, I could buy this, get all the cars sold, pay off all the bills, get all the expenses paid, liquidate it, take the cash out, and I would end up with X dollars. So that's the value of the LLC, which is a smaller number than what the cars would all sell for at an auction.
Right. Okay. No, that makes total sense. Yeah, that's good. I appreciate you walking us through that. Okay. That's really good. Well, what else do we need to cover from a LLC perspective?
Well, if it's, if you can design the LLC and if you spread the ownership around the family so that your wife and kids own parts of it or trust for them, which is just as good, then you can make your interest a minority interest if you evaluate just by yourself. If you have a 40% interest in the LLC, when somebody goes to sell it, they're going to get less because it's a minority interest. You don't get to call any of the shots. Right. It's not marketable. You can't go sell it to anybody. So it gets discounted for lack of control and lack of marketability. So let's say you have, let's pick round numbers, there's $1 million of cars in the LLC and you own 40%. Well, that's 400,000, but you'd have to give a discount to whoever bought that because the buyer with a 40% interest can't possibly force the sale of the cars.
Right.
And there's no marketability. So that $400,000 interest might only bring, 250 or 300,000 if you actually sold it to a third party. So that's the LLC interest value for estate tax purposes.
Right. Okay. So you might not actually sell it, but you're just ballparking it for tax reasons.
Right. It's valued for tax purposes at what it would sell for if you sold it to a bona fide purchaser.
But you would still have to capture the other two parts, the wife and the daughter, let's say, the total 100%. You still have to capture that eventually, right? Or they would have to capture it. Oh, you want it because you're
their piece. Everybody's piece is captured in their estate. So everybody is everybody stays a minority in this.
I gotcha. Right.
So you don't leave your 40% to your wife so that it makes her 40% and 80% interest, because then she doesn't get a discount. You leave your 40% to a trust for your wife's benefit. So it combined with her 40%, for example.
Right.
Keep everything into discrete minority interest.
Right. Okay. No, that's really great. Now I know that we have some questions that were submitted. Is there anything else you wanted to cover just from a estate planning overview before we answered most of the questions, so I'll try to pick out the ones that we didn't answer. But is there anything else you wanted to capture first?
Let's get those, and then I could do 3 more hours if you wanted me to, I suppose. But everybody will, be gone before that happens. So let's get all your questions, and then if we've got more time, we can talk about more stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, a lot of these we've answered. What do I do if I have a will? Since my family knows about my collection, do I need to do anything? There's the big yes. Let's see. How about who needs to be involved with the planning?
You need, honestly, it's not the legal concepts are not really all that difficult, but the practical application and everything is really pretty specialized with cars. So I think you need somebody on the planning team who knows something about collector cars, because it's just not going to be very easy to do that, So,
Right.
and for example, I've consulted with for clients with their regular estate planning lawyers, and help them kind of tweak the estate plan so it fits, the cars fit into it.
Right.
I do that a lot, and the lawyers that I work with and I both do the same stuff every day, and we do the same things when the client has a stock or bond portfolio, and where they have a lot of real estate and stuff, but they get, I kind of surprise them when I start talking about what to do with the cars, because
Right.
they don't understand the cars.
Right. Right. Yeah. So that's good advice. Someone that knows more about it than your average person. Okay. No, that's great. Let's see. Another question was, what's the best way to title my car? So that obviously would depend. Are you setting up an LLC? Are you setting up a trust, or are you not? Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the question presupposes that they're going to get titled, which is like a big deal.
Right. That's true.
You need to get your cars titled.
Yeah.
I've seen, I've worked with people where the last title issued on a car was in
40 years
1970,
ago.
and and there's 12 bills of sale that
Right.
stack onto it, and nobody ever titled the car because nobody ever wanted to pay sales tax on it.
Right. Right.
So that's kind of a mess. If you're trying to get your estate in order, you need to get all the cars titled. So and it's a sales tax issue. So you can title them in a Montana LLC. If the cars were to be parked in Oregon, you could title them in Oregon. So there's approaches to it where you can get them titled without having to pay a sales tax. But you got to do something, because you're kind of creating and transferring a big mess when you just got these what we call open titles.
Yep.
You're better off getting a title on the cars. And it should be titled to either your living trust or the LLC, if you're going to use an LLC, or it could be joint with your spouse if that's the way to go. But usually that's with the dollar levels that we're talking about with these cars, that's probably not what you want to do. I think you want to do something that's kind of tax advantaged.
Right. Right.
See, you don't want them in your business. That creates all other kinds of confusion.
Okay.
Because they're not business assets. So if you have them in your company, when you value the company for estate tax purposes, say you have a company that makes widgets.
Right. Right.
And it also happens to have this car collection. The standard appraisal methodology is that you look at the cars as non-operating assets. So which is the same as like you have just a pile of cash,
Right.
Or some bonds in that company, so it's clearly not part of the operating business. It's just owned by the company.
Right.
So take those out of the company and set them aside mentally, value the company as though they weren't there, and then add the value of the non-operating assets to the value of the company. So you don't get any valuation breaks.
Okay.
And then when they're in a company and you want to take them out, there are often tax consequences to that. You can't give the cars to a specific person because they're part of the business. You know, they go to whoever the business goes to. And if you try to force them to be pulled out of the business, you might be creating some bad tax consequences, depending on the nature of the business and the form of the business. So that's not a good place to put them.
No, I'm glad you said that, because I've run across quite a few collections that were tax shelters, so to speak. At least at the time that they bought them, that was the thought process. So, okay, you mentioned something that I've always wondered about. So I've heard they're really clamping down on getting a car titled in Montana. Can you go over how people do that, why they do that, and why they're clamping down?
Well, I've heard about that for a long time, and I think they're catching on. So Montana. So the states that really play into this are Montana and Oregon, and if you think about it, if you own a car that you keep at your vacation home someplace else in a different state,
Right.
you guys on the East Coast see this a lot because your states are so small, so
Yeah.
you live in New York and you keep a car in Vermont or something, you title it in your home state and nobody thinks anything about that because it's your car and you live in New York, so you title it in New York or something like that. Well, and Oregon has a little bit different approach. It says, well, you can do that. You can title a car wherever you live, but you can also title a car in Oregon if the car lives in Oregon.
Okay.
So if you've got, if you live in California, have a vacation home in Oregon, keep car at your vacation home, you can title it in Oregon. Kind of a common sense thing.
Right.
Montana takes it like a mile further. And it says you can title the car in Montana if it is owned by a Montana organized business entity. And it doesn't matter where the car is or whether the business actually does any business in Montana. If it's just organized under Montana law, you can title the car in Montana. So you live in California, you form a Montana LLC, you title the car in the name of the Montana LLC. There's no sales tax in Montana.
Right.
You get a title and a registration and license plates, and you're probably going to spend like $350 or so doing that. And now you got a legitimate title and a registration and license plates, and you didn't pay any sales tax. And I help people do this. It costs $2,000 plus the registration fees. So it works lickety split, but it has one really big limitation.
And that is?
That is that your title is valid in every single state of the country except the one you live in.
Really?
Yeah, because as soon as you bring the car to the state you live in, your state's law says, oh, well, now that you brought this car into our state, you are required to title it in this state.
Right.
And some states say you have to do it immediately. Some states say
60 days, 90 days.
Something. Right. And when you title it, they make you pay a use tax. And the use tax is equal to the sales tax. So that kind of takes all the upside out of it. Now, California has a pretty useful exception in their law. They say that if you bring the car in, but you've used it outside of California for at least 12 months, then you don't have to pay use tax when you bring it in. So I have clients in California that I help, and they keep their cars up here in Oregon, or they keep them in a different state and title them in Montana. You do it either way. And you keep it outside of California for more than 12 months. And then after 12 months, you can bring the car into California and title it in California. You don't have to pay a sales tax.
So just not that I want to help people avoid taxes or anything, but I'm curious, to set up an LLC in Montana, don't you need a physical address or a PO box, anything like that?
Yeah. You have to have a registered agent in Montana.
Right.
And there's all kinds of people up there and businesses that will serve as your registered agent, and that's it. You just need a post office box, basically.
Right. Okay. Well, not ironically, but happily, we covered all of the questions that came in. We had about 12 questions, and those are the only two I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit more. Is there anything from a collector car estate planning perspective you feel like we haven't touched on yet you would like to talk about?
Well, I got my favorite technique, which is really kind of complicated. We can go into that if you want.
Well, now I want to hear it. It's your favorite, right?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I like. What I think, to me, what's kind of like the holy grail here is that my best idea about how to plan for a significant car collection is to use an LLC to own the cars and do that in conjunction with what's called a grantor trust.
Okay.
You start by putting the cars into an LLC, and then the second thing that you do is you gift parts of a substantial part, all of the LLC, to a trust, and it's a kind of a specially designed trust called a grantor trust. It's an irrevocable gift. And the interest in the LLC that's owned by the grantor trust is outside your estate, and you have to report it on a gift tax return. And if it's big enough, you have to pay a gift tax. But everybody has a $12 million exemption, plus
Wow.
you use your spouses, so you got a lot of room to work with. But whatever the value is, that counts against that exemption. But it gets the interest out of the estate.
Okay.
And the trust is designed in a way where it's treated as a grantor trust. And typically, you do that by giving you a power to substitute other assets for the ones that are in the trust anytime that you want to.
Right.
So if it's got to be equal value for value. And you don't ever have to do it. You just have to have the power to do it whenever you want to. And that flips the switch and makes it a grantor trust. And even though it's an irrevocable trust, even though you don't own any of the things that are inside the trust, you are treated as the owner of all of the trust assets for income tax purposes.
Okay. Right.
But not for estate tax purposes.
Okay.
So now you got this kind of Frankenstein situation where the cars are all owned by this LLC, but the LLC is owned by you and your grantor trust, which means it's all owned by you for income tax purposes.
Okay.
So it's a long foundation to get to a punchline here. So how this helps you is that any transactions between you and the trust are not really taxable transactions.
So what would those transactions look like?
So the one is that you would lease the cars back from the trust, from the LLC.
Okay.
Because you want to drive them, you want to take them to a concours, but more importantly, the LLC needs money to spend on the cars.
Right. Oh, I see. Okay.
And when your kids trust owns the bulk of the LLC that owns the car. Good luck getting them to cough in the money to pay for the new set of tires that the car needs, or this or
Right.
that.
Right.
So you got to finance this thing. So you lease, you pay the LLC rent for using the car. Well, since it's a grantor trust and you own everything inside of it, you own the whole LLC for income tax purposes. So when you pay rent to your own LLC, you're just paying rent to yourself. So it's not rental income. It's nothing. It's not a gift, even though it's money going into the LLC that actually, increases the value of the trust. It's not a gift because you're buying the use of the cars. So you can funnel money into the LLC in order to maintain the collection, pay the insurance premiums, pay for the storage costs, all that stuff. And you're not making a gift and you're not creating any income when you do it.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I can see why that's your favorite. Takes a little while for my brain to wrap itself around it, but yeah, I can see that because you say you're leasing, you're paying a couple $100 a month to use the cars, but that money is, being used to maintain the cars, but it's going through the LLC, like paying the LLC. So I can see how that would kind of balance off and be beneficial to do so.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
If you didn't do that, if you had a non-grantor trust and you gave the LLC to the trust, and then you kicked in the money to take care of the cars, well, then now you're making more gifts to the trust every time you put money into the LLC to pay for expenses. So this kind of gets you around that. So these are all kind of mainstream estate planning techniques that just get put together in a combination that works really nicely with collector cars.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Well, I do want to ask, and I'll have all this information in the description of the podcast and YouTube video. What's the best way for my listeners to find you?
Best way to find me is to email me.
Okay.
It's john@draneaslaw.com. Or just call me, 503-496-5550.
Okay. Like I said, these will be in the description so you can find John and he can help you with your estate planning. So I know there's a lot of collectors that listen to this podcast. So heed his advice, and he's a great person to reach out to if you have questions. So, well, John, thank you so much for being on the Collector Car podcast.
Well, thanks. This was my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.